Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Mets Daily on the Fan Arch Network. John Saponaro here with you today and every day to talk about our New York Mets. And before we get started, a quick shout out goes to our friends over at Kalshi for sponsoring the video for a limited time. Use the code FANARCHBASEBALL on Kalshi.com or the Kalshi app to get 10 when you trade 10. The New York Mets take the series over the weekend against the San Diego Padres, which means they wrap up a 500 road trip. Now look, in any other context, like we talked about all week last week, this would be great. Head out to the West Coast, change time zones, play on Monday in Seattle after playing Sunday in New York, and to split a road trip, to split two series and come back 500, no worse than when you left. That's something that you should be happy about in a typical baseball season. But again, like we've said since I started this show, this is not a typical baseball season for the New York Mets. Now look, I don't want to take anything away from what they did over the weekend in San Diego. I've been to a lot of Mets games down at Petco Park, and it doesn't always go the Mets' way. It's a place where they do not win that often recently. So to come out, to take advantage of a team who is downtrodden, the San Diego Padres are talented, but they are stuck. They are not that dissimilar from the Mets in a lot of ways, and we could talk about that in a second. But the bottom line is, for the most part, the Mets took care of business, and I don't want to take anything away from them for doing that. But it would have been nice if they could have gotten a sweep, especially because of how close they were to getting that sweep. Friday was great. Crisp baseball, they look good, ho-hum victory, really not even much that you need to talk about. And yesterday, in some ways even better. The Mets played by and large throughout the course of this series good defense, they pitched well, they hit well except for Saturday, which again, we'll talk about in a minute. So when you look at the bookend of the series, there's really nothing to complain about. And of course, all of that highlighted by Carson Bench, who we will dive into coming up in just a little bit. And like I said all week, last week, it's difficult to ask baseball teams to go out and sweep series. It is very difficult to do. These are professionals. These are all major league players. It doesn't matter what the records are sometimes. It doesn't matter what the payroll is. It doesn't matter about the players on the field. Sometimes a pitcher's going to have your number. Sometimes a lineup is going to click. And it's very difficult to ask for a sweep. But again, as fans, it's not unreasonable because we're only asking for the Mets to do this because of how poorly they started out. Now, I don't want to have this show be about the negative perspective of not getting a sweep against the San Diego Padres. Again, a 500 road trip is good. Coming back home, no worse than you were when you left, is good. It's just right now in this season, the Mets need to stack those wins, and they need to stack series wins. I'd feel a lot better about this road trip if they were just one game over. If they found a way to beat Seattle on either Monday or Tuesday of last week, I would have said, you know what? They went out to the West Coast. They handled some business. They won both series. Now they're back. They'll take on a bit of a surprising Cardinals team before getting a real test against the Atlanta Braves for their first meeting of the season, which is crazy that it's happening in June, but I digress. So in a typical year, I would take this. This year, it's good, not great, and it's just because of the situation that the Mets have set themselves up in by losing 12 games in a row in April. And they have nobody to thank for it but themselves. But there were plenty of positives to build upon, so we'll see if the Mets can indeed build upon that with what is going to be a pretty difficult homestand coming up. And just a quick note about the San Diego Padres after watching this team all weekend. They are bad. They are a bad baseball team. And it's clear when you look at this team, San Diego. I think John Heyman tweeted this on Sunday, and it's true. The Mets are not the worst offense in baseball. And it's crazy to say that the way the Mets have underachieved for a lot of the year, especially offensively, even when they've been good, they haven't been able to string together too many of these big offensive games in a row. But man, San Diego is bad. And I am flabbergasted. I am shocked that they're an over 500 team. I don't think they're going to be an over 500 team for much longer. And honestly, they're probably just the Mets without the 12-game losing streak. I think the Mets heads would be above water. I don't know if the Mets would be above 500, but the Mets would not be in dire straits had they not had that brutal stretch in April. And I think that's what San Diego is. I think San Diego just lucked their way out of a terrible losing streak. And I know they were on a bit of a skid when they met the Mets. I think it was 8 games in a row, which is bad enough, but contextualized in the Mets season, it's not nearly bad enough. But I think they're if that losing streak extended a bit more, you're looking at the Mets are looking in the mirror at a team that has a lot of the same issues that the New York Mets have. So it was good to go into San Diego, get the 2 wins, come back to New York, feeling a bit better. And like I said, now you see if you could start to take some of those positives, and there were a lot. Bo Bichette looks better. Carson Benj, of course, we're going to talk about here coming up in a second. The pitching was good. The defense is good. Looks like they might get some players back on the horizon, although not all of the players that they thought as quickly as they thought, and we could talk about that coming up in a minute too. But the Mets are going to have the opportunity to build now. And like I said on Friday's show, there is a measuring stick this month. It's not just about the Mets taking June to get right. It's the Mets taking June to get right against better competition. And they're going to start to see that, like I said, with this surprising Cardinals team that we'll talk more about on tomorrow's show, and then that matchup with the Atlanta Braves. But we have to talk about Carson Benj. Carson Benj on an absolute tear in this game on Sunday. He looked so good from his first at bat through all 5 at bats. He goes 5 for 5 and becomes among the Mets' youngest players in franchise history to get 5 hits in a game. John Milner, Jose Reyes, Carson Benj, end of list. And man, did he look good doing it. 10 total bases, 2 RBI, 3 runs scored, a home run, a triple. I mean, you can't have a better day than Carson Benj had for the New York Mets on Sunday. Literally, you cannot. And I don't know, maybe there's something to be said about this 4 for 4 game a couple days ago with Bo Bichette, and now this 5 for 5 game for Carson Benj, where all of a sudden, maybe the offense is clicking. Maybe this Marcus Semien power stroke getting out of April is not smoke and mirrors. I don't think Marcus Semien is going to be the MVP candidate he was a few years ago, but maybe things are starting to turn. Because I will say this about the Mets offense. Injured players or not, I don't think they were as bad as they showed throughout the month of April and even in the month of May where they had a winning record. So maybe it took 2 months and maybe that buried them. Who the hell knows? But hopefully not, right? And when you look at the adjustments that Carson Benj has made specifically to get to the point that he is at, on May 2nd, Carson Benj was hitting 179. He was on the interstate. He looked lost. He looked overmatched, which now sounds ridiculous to say. He was getting beat by fastballs. It looked like he had this punch everything the opposite way approach, even pitches that were inside, even pitches that were hanging that needed to be pulled. He just didn't look ready, quite frankly. His at-bats weren't great. He didn't even have the A.J. Ewing patience. He just looked like a guy who was lost. And I know batting average is not everything, but batting average is something. And 179 is about as bad as it gets. That was on May 2nd. You fast forward a little over a month later to June 7th, and he has got his batting average up to 265. He's driving the ball. He's playing confidently. He is barreling the ball. I know they made that tweak to his stance, and credit goes to the Mets coaching staff. And we haven't been able to say that too often in 2026 so far. And with an almost new coaching staff, top to bottom, throughout the organization here on the Major League roster, we didn't have a lot to go on. We just had the negatives, right? We just had the negatives of like, well, this whole thing just seems sour. And, pitchers aren't right. And the offense isn't clicking. And fire this hitting coach and get rid of this guy. And why did we move on from this guy? Well, the Mets identified something in Carson Bench's swing. He tweaked it. And to his credit, it's not easy to tweak a swing at the major league level, especially when you don't have a major league career to fall back on, as Carson Bench did not. He listened, he took to it, he adjusted, and he has taken off. And it has changed not only how he looks, but maybe it has changed the outlook of this Mets offense, because all of a sudden, when you have a guy like Carson Bench at the top of the lineup doing what he's been doing, and then you add in Juan Soto, and I know he had a down series, you add in Bo Bichette, who looks like he's on the uptick, you add in Marcus Semien, AJ Ewing, who we talked about on Friday, looks like he is kind of falling back into, hey, let's rebound, let's adjust, and then you maybe get Francisco Alvarez back in a few days, and in a couple weeks, maybe you get Francisco Lindor back, and this could be the kind of jumping off point that you're looking for. Carson Bench could be the catalyst, not only at the top of the lineup, but this is going to sound like the dumbest thing ever, guys, but it's true. The more good players you have, the better your lineup's going to be. The more guys you have executing, the better your lineup is going to be. And a big part of the reason why the Mets lineup was so terrible for over a month, over basically 2 months, is because they didn't have guys executing. Even somebody like Brett Baty, who I am not a fan of, as he has gotten to play more third base, he's gotten better to the point where, and again, I don't think Brett Baty is a regular everyday starting player on a good major league team, but he has gotten to the point where he is contributing. He has raised his game up. And when you start to see these guys, Bench was an automatic out. I know this segment's supposed to be about him, but it really is a microcosm. His breakout over the last month is a microcosm of what the rest of this lineup has been doing. And so when he raises his game, he goes from automatic out, guy hitting 179, to a guy who can go 5 for 5, swinging it confidently, knocking in runs, hitting home runs, pulling the ball, hitting the ball hard. Now all of a sudden, it's no wonder the Mets are scoring more. Bo Bichette goes from a guy who couldn't drive in a run for 6 weeks. And I don't know if Bo Bichette is fully back, even though you guys know that I have faith that he will be by the time the season ends. But he goes from a guy who couldn't buy an RBI to not only is he hitting more in the clutch, but he's also doing the little things. You get the sacrifice fly, whatever. Then you get a guy like Marcus Semien. And you have Semien, and it's like, wow, man, this guy, unless he pulls the ball, can't really do much, and he's not pulling the ball hard enough. He's not pulling the ball deep enough. It's just, the defense is okay, and he has solidified the middle of the diamond, even though the eye test and the defensive metrics tell you he's not had a great season, he had an okay season. I think his presence has helped solidify the middle of the defense, the up the middle defense. I think he has contributed there. But you're like, is that what this guy is? Is he a 25 or whatever he makes, $25 million, $28 million, who cares? Is he a 20 some odd million dollar defensive first player who's not going to give us anything offensively. But now you look at it and you're like, wow, he's raised his game. He's stepped up. He's contributing. And as he contributes, as Benj contributes, as Bichette contributes, as Ewing contributes, as Beatty contributes, suddenly it's not Juan Soto out on an island. So the Mets can win 2 out of 3 from a San Diego Padres team when Juan Soto barely has a hit. And speaking of which, I wasn't going to bring this up, but is that not, that game on Saturday that the Mets lost, was that not the most Mets way to lose a game? If you've watched the Mets over any length of time, they go up, they're not hitting Griffin Canning, which they should have, but you kind of knew they weren't, right? That's the Mets' MO. And then they go up by the slimmest of margins. Austin Warren damn near makes a spectacular play. And because he doesn't get that out, he doesn't quite do it. Freddie Fermin, backup catcher, terrible, hitting 176 or whatever on the year, hits his first home run, an absolute monster shot to give the Padres the lead. And then in the next half inning, against a Padres bullpen that is terrific, Carson Benj gets on. Bo Bichette gets on. The Mets are actually hitting the ball hard against the San Diego Padres bullpen. And then Juan Soto absolutely annihilates a ball into a double play. And then after that, Mason Miller's going to come in and the Mets aren't going to score, especially because he was angry and, the Mets scored off him the day before. Mix in the worst at bat Mark Vientos has ever had, but whatever. We don't have time to talk about that today. But it's just like, that was such a Mets way to lose that game. But right in the middle of it is Carson Benj trying to start that rally, trying to do his thing. So now you have a team where, despite the fact that Juan Soto didn't have a good series, the Mets still scored a bunch of runs and took 2 out of 3. And I think that's a great spot to be in. Baseball season is here, and now you can trade every game on Kalshi. And you guys know the drill. Right before I hit record, I went over, I checked out the Kalshi app, and I saw that if you think the Mets are going to make the playoffs, which I know is a tall task right now, and I'm not saying they're all the way back, and one series win out in San Diego does not a season turnaround. I get it. But it is in your favor if you believe. If you think the Mets are going to make the playoffs, $100 will get you $345 on the Kalshi app. On Kalshi, you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there is no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position. For a limited time, download the Kalshi app, use the code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10. Kalshi, trade on anything. 18 and older, restrictions and eligibility requirements apply. Event contract trading involves risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Prices, values, available markets may differ from those mentioned. For more information, see kalshi.com/regulatory. Now the bad of the weekend for the New York Mets, and it didn't even technically, literally, involve the New York Mets. Jorge Polanco, who I talked glowingly about simply because he was going to take, at the very least, playing time away from Mark Vientos, even though Vientos has done a great job of taking playing time away from himself. Maybe he was even going to take a roster spot away from Mark Vientos. He was going to return as soon as Friday in San Diego. That was the report. The Mets were bullish on his return. They were anxious to get him back, and why wouldn't they be? Get another professional hitter, get another quality at bat, get a switch hitter, and like I said, get Mark Vientos on the bench or off the team. They wanted him back. And then we got the first little whisper. Hey, the Mets aren't going to call up Jorge Polanco on Friday. They're going to let him, You're going to let him stay down in rehab. They want him to work more. Okay. Not great. That could be coded, right? That could be read between the lines what's going on. But I'll give it the benefit of the doubt because he hasn't played a ton of rehab games to this point. And, it's not like he was piling up hits. So you're like, you know what? Listen, a guy barely played to start the season. He barely played in spring training as they were trying to keep him healthy, and that didn't work. And then barely played to start the season. He gets hurt. He hasn't played a lot of baseball. He's basically restarting the season. He's going through a spring training. Keep him down a little bit longer. No need to rush him. And then a day goes by and we find out, the Achilles just ain't right with Jorge Polanco. Mets are shutting down his rehab, sending him back to New York, and they will reevaluate. That ain't great, ladies and gentlemen. That's honestly, save for the fact the Mets are playing well, and again, they might be getting Francisco Alvarez back soon, and they might be getting Francisco Lindor back in the not too distant future. This is a pretty big blow. I know what I said in the first portion of the show where the Mets are getting contributions from guys who were basically automatic outs and they've turned it around and look. So right now, are the Mets better positioned than they were a couple weeks ago to carry on without Jorge Polanco? Yes. But this just looks really bad. I mean, Jorge Polanco and Jed Lowry can do the Spider-Man pointing meme at this point. Because if you told me right now that Jorge Polanco doesn't play another game for the Mets this season and it's only early June, I think I'd believe you. Now, if you told me he did come back in a month or so or whatever, I'd buy into that too. But I think both of those are equally believable. And that sucks, quite frankly, because this is a player the Mets targeted. This is a player the Mets jumped the market on. And I understood why they looked for a player like Polanco, a guy who is clutch, a guy who puts bat on ball, a guy who's a switch hitter. I mean, the guy had 2 home runs off Tarek Skubal in a playoff game for the Mariners. So this is a guy who does a lot of things well. But one of the things Jorge Polanco has never really done well is stay on the field. And if you follow me for a long time, I'm not somebody who likes to do the revisionist history thing. But I mentioned to you guys on the show last week that I would have given Pete Alonso the deal that the Orioles gave him, come what may. And it's not even about Pete Alonso necessarily. I understand why the Mets pivoted away from Pete Alonso. But to then jump the market, and this is the second time the Mets have jumped the market and had it not work out. The other one, of course, being Frankie Montas. This is the second time the Mets have done that, and it doesn't look good. When there were other options available. Now, some of those options you could question how available they might have been because they didn't get dealt. Some of them did get traded, and you wonder what the price tag would have been for the Mets, but some of them were available just to sign, right? And so whether that player was Contreras, who winds up going from the Cardinals to the Red Sox, we know he was available. He got dealt. Whether that player was a person like Christian Walker, who didn't get dealt from the Houston Astros, might wind up on the Mets anyway at the trade deadline here if they ever find their way back into it. But maybe Houston didn't want to sell low on Walker after what was a very down year for him. Maybe the Mets called them and didn't like the price, whatever, they balked at it. Okay, fine. You don't want to make a deal, you don't make a deal. But Ryan O'Hearn was out there. This is a guy who's played first base. I know he's another lefty bat, but a guy who's played first base, a guy who's a professional hitter, a guy who, similar profile to Polanco in some ways where you're going to get like a good at bat from him. Mets decided not to go that route. There was a guy who we just saw who's playing kind of out of his mind in San Diego this weekend in Ty France. He was rumored to be connected to the Mets. And myself included, a lot of people laughed it off. But he could have been had for a song, comparatively speaking. So you don't have to go out and give Pete Alonso $150 million. But by that same logic, you also didn't have to give Jorge Polanco $40 million. Because what it seems like right now is a $40 million mistake. I don't remember off the top of my head what Ryan O'Hearn's contract is, but it ain't $40 million. Contreras could have absorbed that deal. Christian Walker, also 2 years left on his deal, I believe, which is the exact length of time that you signed Jorge Polanco to. So there were options. And like I said, Ty France was had for a song. Now, Ty France, I don't think you can be too angry about because, like I said, myself included, I didn't really want a part of Ty France. I thought it was more comical than anything else. But again, I don't work in scouting. I don't work in the Mets front office. These are the people who are supposed to get things like that right. And as somebody like myself who's been a massive David Stearns supporter, one of the things Stearns has always done well is improve on the margins. He improves well on the margins in the bullpen. He improves well on the margins in on the bench, the fringe players on the 26-man roster. And he did that to great success in Milwaukee. He's done it to, I would say, middling success at best with the New York Mets. Some of the moves have not worked out. This Jorge Polanco one is bad. It's bad for Polanco. I think long-term it's bad for the Mets lineup this season. I think it's a bad look for David Stearns in a season where he could really use a good look. David Stearns could have looked really good if Jorge Polanco comes back on Friday, DHs a bunch, and just hits like a madman for, 3 weeks. And the Mets win a bunch of games, and the Mets get back to 500. All of a sudden, you start sitting there going like, okay, I didn't like it, and he might get hurt again, but right now, dude's doing his thing. It's bad for everybody involved, except for probably Mark Vientos, because Mark Vientos has 9 lives, because Mark Vientos ain't going anywhere at all until Jorge Polanco gets back. He's done a good job of playing himself out of a starting role. You saw that with, Jared Young now getting the lion's share of the starts at first base. And I think you're going to continue to see MJ Melendez get a lot of run at DH for better or for worse. And I think, Mark Vientos is just going to become a short side platoon player, either at first or at DH. And, again, like I said on Friday, I'm not sure if he's suited for that because I don't think his ego will take it, but it is what it is. Jorge Polanco's out is bad for everybody connected to the Mets, with the exception of one Mark Vientos. Finally, I want to take a moment. I know this happened on Saturday. So by the time I'm recording this and by the time you guys are watching, it's kind of old news. But Soto not running out that ground ball to second base is not a big deal. And I said this happened on Saturday, happened on Friday. Soto not running out that ball to second base, I'll say it again, is not a big deal. Juan Soto does not get paid to bust out of the box on a routine ground ball to second base, a play that is fielded, 97, 98% of the time, with 2 outs, where the Mets are already winning. He does not get paid to bust out of the box on that play. Some of you old school fans are going to get annoyed when I say that, but it's just the truth of Major League Baseball. These guys need to be healthy for 6 months. These guys need to be productive for 162 games or as close to that as you can come. And let's not forget Juan Soto missed 2 weeks earlier this season because of a calf strain. I don't need him busting out of the box on one of the highest probability outplays in the sport, pulling up lame, and missing more time. Mets don't need that. Fans don't want that. So you might think that it's great to say you got to hustle on every play. Look, developmentally, that's true. When guys are coming up through the minor leagues, You want them hustling. You want them pushing. You want them grinding. The last guy on your bench at the major league level, the 26th player, you need him hustling. I want to see Vidal Brujan bust out of the box. And of course, if you're teaching kids how to play the game, little kids, you teach them to hustle on every play because it is a good learning metric, but it is not something that a professional player needs to do, especially one who is at the top of the sport, especially one who is not getting paid for those instances. Can you sit there and say, it looks bad? Sure, I guess you could say that. But if you're really mad about it, I'm sorry, the anger is misguided. Again, you need these guys to be healthy for the whole season. You can make a case that even guys like Griffey and Mike Trout, who played phenomenal defense with their devil-may-care attitude, crashing into walls and doing all of this stuff, it's part of what made them legendary as players. And look, if you have those kinds of tools on defense, which Juan Soto does not have, I understand you want to show those off. But you know what? They might have been healthier players later in their careers, just taking it a little slower. I'm not saying you let balls drop. I'm not saying you don't play hard. I'm saying you don't need to run full tilt into a wall. Everybody always used to make fun of Bobby Abreu for stopping short of the wall out in right field. It's like, listen, man, you don't need to take these bumps if you're a wrestling fan. You don't need to take the bumps. There's no off season in wrestling. So sometimes you got to say, hey, you know what, man? This is free TV. You don't take that bump. That's how I look at it with Juan Soto. If Juan Soto needs to beat that play out to win the Mets a game, okay. If Juan Soto needs to beat that play out in the playoffs, sure. Juan Soto does not need to beat that ball out in early June in the fourth inning or whatever it was, third inning of a game that the Mets are already winning. A game that the Mets went on to win anyway on, again, a very high probability chance that an out is recorded there. And I know I'll probably get some grief in the comments about it. But I told you guys on day one I was never going to lie to you. And I just don't think you need to worry about him hustling out of the box every single play, every single at bat. Baseball's a long season. 6 months, 162 games, 500 and some odd at bats, closer to 700 plate appearances or whatever. You can't worry about it. You can't sweat every one of these. And so that would be my advice to you. Not only do I not expect the players to hustle out each and every single time, just for your own sake, it's not going to happen regardless of how much you want it to. So for your own sake, don't stress it. That's going to do it for this episode of Mets Daily here on the Fan Arch Network. I'm John Saponaro. See you tomorrow.